So, hi everybody, and welcome to this session, which is a workshop with Tania about how to write a good README file. So, Tania is a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and she's also a Google developer expert in machine learning, and she's joining us from Manchester, UK. So, I'm going to leave the stage for you, Tania, and the stage is yours.
Hi, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you, Sherry. And I have my screen somewhere. I'm going to be talking about writing a great README. Yes, I intentionally add the word great, so you can all upskill yourselves in how to write READMEs for your open source projects, no matter how big or small or new they are. And I'm gonna start as folks. So this is what we're gonna be covering. I'm gonna throw in a couple of fireside things so you can actually do a tiny bit of work. Not like homework, but just like a little tasks. And we're gonna focus first on why README, like why would we actually want to write a README? Why do we need to put an effort when we have documentation, tutorials, and a lot of other things out there? Then I'm gonna build some context on how you can actually improve your README, how we can reframe how we think about our README and our projects, and finally, some hot tips on how you can write a great README or improve the one that you currently have. And before diving into the workshop, this is me. I look exactly the same. First of all, I love open source. I use open source day in, day out, and have been contributing to it for, I don't know, quite a while now. Probably I've been in the open source community for about 10 years. You can tell if you've ever seen my Twitter or any of the stuff that I do, that I'm obsessed with purple and the Outrun aesthetics. I also love mechanical keyboards, and yes, I work as a developer advocate. And I know that a lot of still that developer advocate term, although it has become very popular over the last few years, it also sounds a bit esoteric when I say I'm a developer advocate. So briefly, my job is making developers and communities work better and tools better, and working also with them and with our engineering teams to improve our tools so that they actually help them to fill their needs that they have, so that we can better support the open source infrastructure and things of the such. So let's start with why do we even need a README? Like, we have documentation, right? We have a lot of stuff. And this is going to be a fireside quiz. If any of you want to write on the Discord or just think a tiny bit, where is that your users usually find information about your project, whether it is a tool or an open source library, or some sort of infrastructure? And also, how do you onboard new contributors? How is this process when someone, I don't know, finds your product or your library and then uses it, finds an issue, or they just love it so much that they want to work on it in the long term? Okay, so I know that there is a bit of a delay, and I know that some folks are going to say landing pages, right? And this is one of our landing pages for our Azure Functions product within Microsoft. And normally, if you do a web search for this product, it's going to take you to this landing page, and it will bring up all of this sort of information, right? And this is the same for a lot of other projects. For example, TensorFlow is a very, very popular machine learning framework. It has become very popular and folks use it for a lot of things. And it's completely open. Well, it's open source. It was incubated by Google, but it's all open source. And again, it has a landing page that takes you through many different issues, well, like many different aspects of TensorFlow, tutorials, API resources, and such. And this is also the landing page for one of my favorite NLP projects, which is called Spacey, from the folks at Explosion. And again, it's the same concept. So if you're a technical writer or if you work within a product team, more than likely a lot of your effort goes into designing these landing pages, into writing the documentation, into making sure that everything is consistent, that the style guide and the tone of your docs and your landing page makes sense and it's uniform regardless of who's contributing to it. But I want you to drive your attention to the top right corner of that landing page where actually you'll see the GitHub icon. And I actually think, depending on what your product is, depending on what you're working on, that is one of the many, many roads that your users can take. You can try and lay a nice path. Let's say your landing page where they're going to find everything and anything about your project. But if there is something I have learned from software development is that you can think how your users are going to use your product, and they always find different ways to do it. And that's the same when it comes to onboarding paths. The way in which your clients, users, whether if your clients or your users are other developers or other open source contributors or maintainers, can divert a lot. And I dare to say that for developers or machine learners or makers and enthusiasts, the README is that landing page, is that first interaction between them and your project. Well, it doesn't matter if your project is in GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. Whenever you go to a repository that contains the source code for a given project, that is the thing that welcomes you. That is the first thing or the first information that you're going to see. And this is not coincidence. This is completely intentional. This is so that folks actually go and read that document and get onboarded. And at the moment, if you go to GitHub, you're going to be familiar with these nice rendered READMEs. They are understandable, they're legible. And probably, well, when you open a new repository, it always gives you the suggestion to create a new README to provide context on your project. And one of the most commonly used markup languages is Markdown. I use Markdown all the time. I'm going to say every day. But that's not the only one that is supported. If probably some of you are familiar with restructured text, I also use restructured text all the time. We use it a lot for things documentation. I'm just checking on my dog. But there are many other markup languages that are supported as well and that you can use to build your documentation. And the folks working in this products like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, they've put a lot of effort in making sure that those markup languages are nicely rendered and nicely presented when you open your project. So this is when you go to a project, I'm using as an example Spacey. the natural language processing package that I shared before. If you go to their GitHub repository, this is what you're going to be faced with, which is very, very nice. It's very appealing. I look at it and I want to read it. But if you're a developer and you're using the library or you go and clone the repository, this is how it's going to look. When you do a clone of that repo, or a fork and clone it and download it on your personal laptop, this is how that nicely rendered README looks. And this is how I read a lot of READMEs these days. But it is not only like developers, but it's not only developers. My dog is being a terror. Not only developers, but also package managers that make use of this README. So in the world of Python, if you upload your library or your software to the Python package index, and it has a README, this is how it's going to display. So not only can you download this package and see the latest version, but you also have a direct link to the README and the project homepage, which in most cases, again, the homepage leads to the repository and therefore the README. So when we bring this different context and these different lenses through which we might see a project or a README, it becomes obvious that this README is a map. It's like where it can be similar to a map where it tells you here is where you are, and these are the different avenues that you can take to get upskill, to contribute, to be part of this community, to use this project. And this is why this project is valuable and important for you. Sorry, my PA is destroying a box. So we now understand why we need a README, why it is essential. I think READMEs have been around since the 70s, late 60s, I'm going to say. And the reason why it's called README is that it is the very first thing that someone reads when they access a code base or a package. So if we want to not only tell our users or our contributors or community members where they are, but also lay the many paths in which they can take to belong or reintegrate to the community, we have to build and provide context. And we do that through the README again. Because a good README not only tells you this is the package, I don't know, like eat sandwich or guacamole, and that's it. A good README or a useful README answers these 4 questions. Why? Of course, the project title, what is this about, the purpose and scope. And so many times, I don't know if it's because we sometimes are too excited to get a project out there and we assume that folks just get the purpose and the scope of our project either from other sources or just by using it. But not many projects have this purpose or scope described in the README. And sometimes when I am trying to compare multiple projects that do similar things, I do want to understand why I would choose one over the other. The second question your README should answer is a how. How to get help. How can you contact maintainers? And this goes in many directions. How can you get help if you found an issue and you want to fix it or you just want to raise it? How are you gonna contact maintainers if there are any issues within the community with regards to code of conduct violations? And it also should lay the path for those folks that want to contribute. How are they supposed to do that? What are the mechanisms that they have to contribute? What are the different routes in which they can contribute? What kind of contributions you're taking on at the moment? So that should also be laid out. Probably not having the full contribution guidelines, but at least saying that you're accepting contributions, that you have linked directly to your contribution guidelines, and make sure that that is visible. There are other projects that are not taking, for example, contributions at the moment, and it's also useful to add that wording in the README so that folks know what they're expected to do. Additionally, a good README should answer the question where to go for more information or further resources. Normally, your README has simple examples or examples to get folks onboarded and upskilled very, very easily, or get the basics. But where would more advanced users or users that need more complex use case go for more learning? And it also should provide context on who this project is for, who are the intended users or product consumers, who can contribute, and who contributes to, and who maintains a project currently. Nowadays, there are programs, for example, the GitHub sponsors, TagLift, non-focus as well, where you can sponsor projects or you can make a donation. So those are, if that's something that your project has, it should also be included, because some folks might not be able to contribute by writing code and sending pull requests, or creating designs, or writing documentation or tutorials, but they might have a couple of spare bugs that they can send to a project. And that is also meaningful and valuable. But again, not all READMEs are equal. And when I say that not all READMEs are equal, I not necessarily refer about quality or the nitty-gritty details of the structure. Your README is going to have a slightly different anatomy depending on what that README is or what is within that repository. Some different types of projects that we can find in GitHub are, for example, libraries or packages, depending on the programming language that you belong to. They are called different ways. Sometimes folks call it different way depending on certain architectural considerations or implementations, whether it's a tool or a demo app. Probably you are creating demo apps for your clients or to test new features from one of your open source projects. A lot of folks are using also open source for research. Actually, there is a whole open research and open education and open science movement, and open source is a very, very powerful tool that enables and empowers these researchers to do their work. So there are also a lot of repositories whose purpose is not just to contain the code base for the software that folks developed, I don't know, to analyze, to do NLP or do machine learning, or to do modeling of infectious diseases, but it's actually the repository where they contain the research outputs, whether it's a doctoral thesis or an article, or they're using Jupyter notebooks to do the analysis, and then the output of the article to make a reproducible research asset. And finally, something that is very, very common for us in the world of DevRel is supporting code. Imagine that we are working on a blog post about how to get all your TensorFlow models to have an accuracy over 89%. I don't know, this is very random. I'm making it as I go. And sometimes you're going to create supporting code so that folks can follow along. or you're teaching folks how to build Docker containers for something. And this code is in support of your tutorial or your demo or your blog post or your presentation. So based on the characteristics of the project that you are hosting on GitHub, also your README is going to change in characteristics. So this is hands-on, and I don't know if you folks are going to do that, but I'm going to assume yes. And then just head on to github.com/explore. If you are logged into GitHub, it's going to give you a recommendation of repos based on the kind of repos that you work on or the kind of repos that you visit or projects that you interact with. Just have a very quick look at those repository and identify what type of repo it is, if it's a library, a tool, a demo, or a supporting code. Gonna give just 2 minutes so that folks can have a look if that's what they're doing. Right. So now let's dive a bit more into what we might want to have into these READMEs. When I visited this GitHub Explorer webpage yesterday, I think most of the repos that were shown there were kind of, what was it? They were tools and packages. They were all tools and packages, and there were no demos or things of the such. So let's imagine that you have created an amazing package that will, by default, create magical aliases for all of your Git commands. Let's say that you love unicorns, like the unicorns that I've been putting on my slides, and you make a rule that all of your Git commands will start with unicorn something. So let's go to what is the must. There are things that have to be there if it's a library. To start with, we would need the steps for the installation. But it's not simply go and install it using wget and then extract and install, but include what are the prerequisites. If folks need certain technology or other libraries or compilers beforehand, make sure that that is aware there. In some cases, you're able to specify the required packages that folks need to have installed in their environment. But there might be some other technological needs that folks need to fulfill before. Sometimes you might need also to create an account for something to be able to install or access the binaries. Also provide context on what supported platforms are there. Like, be very specific. We support Windows, Linux, Mac OS, or only this distribution of Linux, because that also makes it very, very clear to those folks that are using non-traditional platforms or, oh, I don't know what happened, or less commonly used platforms so that they can go and look for other alternatives that to your package. And provide detailed instructions. If you are covering the 3 main platforms, let's say Windows, Linux, Mac OS, provide detailed instructions on all of this to be able to install your package. Bonus points if you have a stable and beta release, and you provide also instructions on how folks can get the Edge or the latest or the stable release. Also, you want your folks or your users to be able to use your library or your package as soon as possible and as fast as possible. That is like one of our ultimate goals when we write documentation. Help folks to upskill and use what we are building for them. So make sure to include loads of examples, loads of examples, and 101s being entry-level guides, samples, or quick start guides. Make sure that once a folk has checked your README, they know what they got into, like what the package is, how they can get it, and how they can use it. That is the bare minimum that a README for a library or a package should include. And if you think about it, having these 3 components has already laid the onboarding path for your user, whoever your user is. If you are building an app or a demo, let's say that now that package that I created to create unicorn theme Git aliases for myself, now I want to bundle it in an app. And I want to not only change my Git aliases, but also the look of different applications that I use. For example, GitKraken or Notion or Twitter. I don't know. I want everything to be purple and rainbow color or rainbow color. So how are folks are meant to use this app? Like, do I download it? Do I install it? Do I access it through the web? So again, think of apps or demos READMEs as everything that is in the library or package README plus some nice extras. You're going to have, again, the same context of installation, usage, lots of examples, prerequisites, supported platforms, plus deployment instructions. This is very important, especially if you have libraries or if you have apps that folks can self-host. An example of this is if you're if you're creating an app platform because you want to run elections, well, for folks that run elections, for example, on executive councils, societies, and things of the such, you might give them the option to use your hosted app and your hosted service, but in some cases, folks might want to deploy this for security and privacy issues, or because they can't have their data hosted in the US if they are based in Ireland, for example. So provide all of these deployment instructions on how they can go from 0 to having a usable product. And this goes for both from apps and demos. If this is a demo on how folks can get started creating websites with Gatsby, for example, make sure that you have that you take them from 0 to something usable. And within your deployment instructions, always make sure that you have references to special environments. For example, how to differentiate between your local development environment and your production environment, and when you are ready to deploy something out so that folks can access it. Sometimes it might seem obvious, or for some of us that have been working for a while with tech or software, it might seem obvious that environment variables sometimes contain confidential or data or keys, and we don't want to hard code them, or we don't want to commit this to GitHub. But remember that not all of your users have the same path and come from many different backgrounds. So if they are going to need to set environment variables that are later going to be used for deployment and can lead to security breaches, make a note of this and make sure that they are aware of these possible breaches. Also, provide details on how they can debug your app, how they can debug your demo, and how they can troubleshoot the most commonly faced issues. Probably for more complex issues, you can redirect them to Stack Overflow with a Stack Overflow search with special tags, or you might have a Gitter channel or a Discourse server or something of the such. But again, make sure that those there you go. Can you still hear me? So then there is that. And I'm gonna intentionally miss the research assets, and I forgot what I said. I'm gonna intentionally miss the research assets because those are very, very niche. It's a very small community. But if you want to discuss that, I am very, very, very happy because I work a lot with researchers and scientific computing folks. So I am more than happy to provide guidance and design. So I've already spent a lot of time on saying how these different repos for different kind of how this README is for different kind of repos or products are different from each other and what may or may not be included in them. So it's time for us to discuss what should be in every single repo that you write or that you produce. First of all, name the thing. And I think this is one of the most complex problems when it comes to software development or tech. Naming the thing is just so hard. It is so complicated. But if you've already spent time naming the thing, make sure that the name of your project is on the repo, it's on the README, it's in a lot of places. I'm going to be surprised about how many repos are there whose title or name differ from the actual project. If you want to make it extra flary or extra, well, a bit fancier and catchier, add your logo. If your project has a logo, add it there. It's a very good place to give visibility and also for folks to remind, to remember your product, your brand. And even if it's an open source project, all open source projects have a brand, and we want folks to remember that, and we want folks to use whatever we've been working on and spend a lot of time and love and effort in. Thing number 2, or item number 2, that has to be in every single repo. And that is a description. I said before that there are a lot of repositories, and I encourage you to do this exercise. Go to different repos and try and see how many of these actually have a concise, well-written description of what the project is and what it does. Make sure to also add who it is for. Is this aimed at folks that are interested in DevOps? Is this for makers? Is this within a machine learning branch? Is this for folks that are doing natural language processing, deep learning, MLOps? Who is this for? Extra flair, extra or bonus points is add the description and tags to the repo itself. In GitHub, for example, you can have a top description that now, because of the changes of the UX, is on the right, but that gives you like a snippet size or a bit size description of your project. Fill that in. That is super, super important, and add tags that are relevant to your project. These tags are massively helpful for search engine optimization, for discoverability, for folks, again, to get like a quick look into the context of your project as well. Intended use. Again, what is this for? What am I supposed to do with this project or with this product? Is this meant to be installed again? Am I meant to import it? Am I meant to download? Can I add it as a submodule? What do I do? Also, provide context if folks need, if it's completely open source, it's and free, or if folks need access to a secondary platform or to a service subscription to be able to leverage the benefits of this, make sure that that is there. There are a lot of products that have like this freemium approach where you get certain features for free, and then if you want, for example, to have hosting or Kubernetes enabled capabilities, then you need to pay for I don't know, like Pachyderm Hub or something of the such. If you want to add flair, and if you want to give extra context, provide context on why your project is unique when people want to use this. I really like this example from Spacey. I think by now you'll notice that I love Spacey. But again, you're giving context on why folks might want to use your project, your project or your product, and what is that gap that it's filling. Like, why is it needed when there are so many other offerings for NLP projects? Why there are so many other apps that can create fancy or silly GitHub aliases for you? Oh, why is my slides are completely crazy? Prerequisites. I already mentioned this, but again, that has to be in every single repo. This is essential. And prerequisites come in many different flavors and in many different kinds. If, for example, it is a Python package, do folks need other programs? Do folks need other libraries? Also, if you have constraints, recently, well, very early this year, Python 2.7 was dropped. Like all support has been dropped. Well, it was how's it called? I forgot the word in English. Retired, yeah. So Python 2.7 has been retired. So now also a lot of the projects are stopping or completely shutting down their support for Python 2.7. But also there are folks that only support the latest versions of Python. So also make sure that that is specified. Also, if you only serve very limited versions, let's say 3.6 and 3.7, make that obvious. Because there are folks that are going to be running on the latest versions or the release candidates of your programming language or dependencies. Again, if there are different flavors of package managers within your ecosystem that folks can use to install your package, also provide context on this. For example, I use a lot of package managers. I mostly use Anaconda for data science projects, but when I'm working on projects that are not data science or machine learning or scientific computing heavy, I use things like Poetry or VirtualEnv. So sometimes I just want to use pip. I just want to use pip to install something quickly, and I want to see what are the different ways that I can install a package. Installation, I already mentioned it before, and I put on asterisk. There are things that are not meant to be installed, but accessed through a website. Again, mention that you don't have to install anything, that they only access your service through a URL, and that's good enough. Again, if they need a subscription, even if it's only that they need to create a new account for authentication purposes, make it explicit. Bonus point, if you have certain community builds, let's say that you're a small project and you can only provide support for certain platforms or certain builds, but the awesome folks in the community have made ports so that other architectures or other platforms or other operating systems are supported, mention that. Mention which are directly supported by the core team and which others are contributed by the community, and how folks can reach out to these community sections that are providing this support or these builds. Extra flair. This is very, very common now in machine learning. Sometimes we install a package, but then we need to download additional models, or we need to download additional corpora for us to actually be able to use the package. Mention that. Mention that depending on your use cases, there are additional things or plugins that you're going to need to download for this to be usable. And if it's usable on its own, also mention that. Examples, and I cannot mention this enough, add many examples. One of my favorite command line applications, I'm going to call it, is HTTP. I discovered it in a PyCon lightning talk, and it has changed the way I interact with APIs and requests. And I love their README because it's a super well written README, but they provide so much context in their examples for different use cases. They pretty much any simple case that I might need is in there. For more complex use cases or things, I have to go to the documentation, but I always go back to the README. Provide steps on how to get started, steps needed after the install, and this is provide steps even if there are extra configuration that folks need to do, like adding credentials, or even just like vanity configurations, like changing the syntax highlighting color to create different profiles, to mute notifications or things of the such, and also add the link to main docs. Extra flair if you add GIFs or videos and schematics. One person in this big chunk of our population that is highly visual. I am a very, very, very visual learner, and if I find things that have GIFs, videos, schematics, and how the parts are brought together and interact together, I find it so much more valuable than just reading massive blocks of text. Producing these kind of things can be very time consuming. But if you have the time or the bandwidth, it is so worth it. I can't recommend it enough. Then another integral part is, well, you've onboarded your folks, they're using your product, they're very happy because you have like 50,000 gifts. Where do they go if they have any issues? Make sure that at least at the bare minimum, you have instructions on how to ask questions or report bugs. Even if, again, it's obvious to us that if you find a bug in the code base, you go and create or raise an issue. there are some folks that are still very new or have never used GitHub, or simply they don't know if they can ask questions. So provide context on who's maintaining it. Provide context on how to raise reports, how they go about requesting feature requests, um, requesting features, bonus points for having different templates, but that is outside README. If provide other means of help or contact like Stack Overflow, the Gitter chat, if there is a Reddit user group, and where can folks go for general discussions? DVC also, I don't know if any of you is familiar with the project DVC from Iterative. They're amazing at this. They have a Discord channel that is super, super active. And they have like Discord server, and they have different channels where they highlight community contributions and new tutorials. And I always go there so I can figure out what's new in the world of DVC. But I only found that because that was in the README. Otherwise, I don't think I would have found a Discord server. And contributions. I am a personal fan of these projects that use, or the project itself, that is a all contributors bot. So there are, again, different things and different information that we can add with regards to contributions. First, make sure that you have your contribution guidelines and that folks are aware that they exist. Link to them. Next to it, add a little description, like the very, very brief summary of your contribution guidelines. Add a code of conduct and make it visible in your README. This helps folks to feel safe, and it's a very good indication that you care about your community, and that is that the code of conduct reporting enforcement is an important thing to you and the rest of the project maintainers. And again, how to raise issues. If you want to add flair, again, there are many ways in which you can add folks that contribute to different projects. I mentioned before that I am a massive fan of this all contributors bot because it adds all the folks and it provides you so many options on the type of contributions that folks are doing, because not all contributions are trackable through GitHub, through the GitHub graph, or are not commits. A lot of the contributions that are very, very valuable in open source refer to attracting funding, doing road mapping, project governance, thinking, or ideas, organizing events. So I think that this bot actually does a very good job in widening that window of participation and contribution. And if you can add that to your project, that would be amazing. I know it gets really hard when you have hundreds or thousands of contributors, but if you're a smaller project, you might want to do that. And finally, additional resources. We've done all of the legwork of getting folks started, making sure that they know where to ask for help, that they know how to use a product, how to use a product, how to get started. But what happens when they've consumed all of that and they need to start doing things a bit more complex, or they just want to learn more about your product or how this is used in the real world? Provide additional resources where folks can go and learn more, even if it's your main documentation or your API reference linked there. If you've noticed that your community members have written really good tutorials or really good blog posts in, for example, dev.to or else, add them there and direct them there. That is also acknowledging the contribution from your community, but also you're redirecting folks to other sources that might be helpful. And extra dazzle, this is not mandatory, but it certainly adds a lot of context to your project. Shields are badges. There are so many different shields and badges that you can add, and you can customize them in so many ways. But for example, if you have um, continuous integration and continuous delivery, have a badge there. You can have badges to display the versions, the latest version, although you have the tag, for example, what code style you're using. If you have a Gitter chat, you can add a badge there so folks can go directly. I see that in the Turing way at the top at DOY, and that is for folks to be able to cite your software in, for example, academic papers, or acknowledge that their project builds on it. And it also gives you a very, very big, a very good insight on having all of these badges gives you insight into what the maintainers and the community care about. If you can and you want to add more context, add badges. The second, if you see the images, the second one is for Spacey again. Ines and all the maintainers, I love Spacey. They even have a follow button for Twitter, so you can keep up to date with all of the news. And all of this makes the interaction and the communication channels between you and your users or your community easier and more open. So I've come to the end of my workshop, and my advice is use your README. Use it to help onboard and help all your users to choose and design their path within your community and your project. I know we don't like writing documentation, although I love writing documentation, but I know it sometimes feels like a chore, especially when you've spent so much time writing the docs or doc strings. But if we start reframing our README as this pathways, or like this map that can lay different pathways for our community members, I think we are able to make a much more meaningful use for them. And here are some resources. I'm gonna be posting my slides. I'm going to be adding them and creating a link so you can all download them, use them, and remix them. Everything is CC BY, so feel free to use. And here are some resources on so you can learn a bit more about READMEs. I added one for license for those folks that want to learn more about license, because if it doesn't have a license, an open source license, it is not open source. I also added a link to an awesome README GitHub repository. If you're familiar with these awesome collections, they have like a massive set of resources. In this case, it's all about README, and there are some READMEs that you can go and explore and get inspiration for you to improve your current README. And the last link is for an amazing presentation from Daniele Procida. He is amazing for Write the Docs, and it's about the 4 kinds of documentation and why you need these different kind of documentations and what they are for. So these also will help you to set the context for the kind of examples and onboarding guides that you might add to your READMEs to welcome new users or new contributors. And thank you very much. If you have any questions, fire away on the Discord channel. You can also find me there. My website is at the top. It's trallard.dev. You can also find me on Twitters as Ishek or GitHub as Trallard. And thank you very much, folks. I was I'm very, very glad that I was asked to talk about README, and I'm generally happy to talk about anything open source. I hope you found this workshop useful, or you learned something, or at least I didn't bore you with almost an hour of me talking. And I hope to see you around in the open source community.
Thank you very much. For those of you that you are watching, you need to head back to the main page and then try to find which session you want to join next. And if you have more questions, you can find Tania in the Discord channel. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.